The city of Ballarat rests at the foothills of the Great Dividing Range in central western Victoria, an area also known as the Central Highlands. For approximately 40,000 years before European settlement, the Wadawurrung and Djajar Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation called this region home. The name Ballarat, or more accurately Ballarat, is derived from an Aboriginal word meaning resting place, with Balla symbolizing reclining on the elbow. The European story of Ballarat began in August 1837, a time when colonial Australia was still finding its footing. Queen Victoria had not yet been crowned, Melbourne was little more than a cluster of huts, and Geelong's coastline was dotted with only a handful of tents. It was during this period that a group of adventurous settlers set out from Geelong to explore the uncharted northwest. Among them were Thomas Livingstone Learmonth, Surveyor Frederick Robert Darcy, Dr. Thompson of Geelong, David Fisher from the Derwent Company in Tasmania, Captain Hutton of the East India Company, and Henry Anderson. Equipped with basic provisions and guided only by compass, they embarked on a journey toward the distant Mount Buninyong, venturing into the wild unknown. Reaching the mount, they surveyed a vast, untouched wilderness, forests stretching endlessly, dotted with hills and promising landscapes. To the northwest, they spotted Lake Burrumbete and the far-off Pyrenees and Grampians ranges. Though the land was alluring, the journey proved challenging. The explorers split into groups, lost their bearings, and some went without provisions as they made their way back to the coast. This marked the beginning of the exploration that would eventually lead to Ballarat's rise as a city of gold and wonder. In January 1838, exploration resumed with a new party, including John Aitken, Henry Anderson, Thomas and Somerville Learmonth, and William Yulee. Starting from Aitken's home near Mount Aitken, they journeyed toward Mount Alexander, recently occupied by overlanders from Sydney. From there, they followed the Loddon River, unknowingly traversing gold-rich land. The explorers reached a prominent peak they named Ercildown, after the Learmonth's ancestral ties to Thomas the Rhymer of Scotland. Nearby, they discovered Lake Burrumbete and its rich pastures. Despite the area's promise, the harsh conditions were memorable. Camping near Ercildown on a cold night, they dubbed the site Mount Misery. Lake Burrumbete, shallow and salty at the time, dried completely the following year, leaving fertile ground for grazing after vegetation was cleared. By 1838, settlers began moving into this newly explored land. Within 2 years, pioneers such as the Learmonth brothers, Archibald and William Cross Yulee, and Waldai had established themselves across what would later become the Ballarat and Buninyong goldfields. Other notable settlers, including members of the Clyde Company from Tasmania, expanded into the area around Moorabool and the Lee River. Figures like George Russell, Major Mercer, and Neville further extended settlements, with landmarks such as Mount Mercer and Ross Creek bearing their names. Travel during these early days was no easy feat. Roads were non-existent, and dense forests, like those near Ballarat, were overgrown with native hop. In 1846, Archibald Fisken of Lal Lal achieved a remarkable milestone when he became the first to navigate the Warrenhype and Bullarook forests by vehicle, paving the way for further settlement. The Learmonth brothers established their homestead on land that would later become the site of the Buninyong Gold Mining Company. Nearby, one of the earliest pioneers, Henry Anderson, settled near Winters Flat, where Woolshed Creek meets the Yarrawee River. This area was eventually acquired by the Yulee family, who named the surrounding wetlands Yulee Swamp, known today as Lake Wendouree. It wasn't long before other settlers followed, each leaving their mark on this promising land. Waldai established the Windholme estate northwest of Ballarat, while the Yulee family, who had initially settled near Inverleigh on the Barwon River, relocated to Ballarat due to conflicts with local Aboriginal people. Smythe's Creek and Carngham were named after settlers Smythe and the Bailey brothers, with Bailey Creek later becoming a prominent feature of the area. Among the notable settlers was Andrew Scott, who claimed land at Mount Buninyong. His wife holds the distinction of being the first European woman to travel through the region, famously crossing the dry bed of Lake Burrumbete in 1840. These early pioneers played a pivotal role in laying the groundwork for Ballarat's growth, shaping both its geography and its legacy. Interestingly, Buninyong existed as a township well before Ballarat's establishment, reflecting its early significance in the region's development. The first huts in Buninyong were constructed in 1841 by sawyers, splitters, and other settlers. Among them, George Innes, famously known as the King of the Splitters, stood out. Other early settlers included George Gabb and George Coleman. Gabb and his wife, renowned for her exceptional horseback riding skills, became prominent local figures. Gabb opened an inn for travellers in Buninyong, and soon after, Campbell and Woolley relocated their store next to it. A blacksmith joined the growing settlement, and in 1844, Dr. Power established the area's first medical practice. Buninyong quickly evolved into a bustling settlement, serving as a safe haven for the families of bullock teamsters and others in the burgeoning region. It became a cornerstone of early life in inland Victoria. Before the gold rush forever transformed the landscape, Ballarat, Ballarat East, and Sebastopol were serene pastoral lands. The area was characterized by rolling grassy slopes, dense forests, scattered trees, and clear waterholes, a tranquil expanse inhabited by only a handful of settlers, with sheep and cattle grazing peacefully in the vast herbage. Occasionally, bullock teams would pass through, their heavy wagons inadvertently carving out tracks that would later become streets. What is now Sturt Street in Ballarat West was once a lush plateau, blanketed with native grasses and golden wattles. A small gully meandered through where Sturt Street now descends, and the area that today hosts the post office and the eastern side of Lydiard Street was once charmingly dotted with wattles. Ballarat, before the gold rush, was little more than a forgotten outpost on the Yulee Brothers sheep run, quietly awaiting the moment it would be thrust into the spotlight of history. This pastoral idyll, untouched by urbanization, was destined to change dramatically with the discovery of gold, bringing bustling activity and a complete transformation to the landscape. The area where Craig's Hotel now stands was a favored camping spot during Ballarat's pastoral era. With reliable access to water, abundant grass, and protection from floods, it provided an ideal resting place for herdsmen, shepherds, bullock drivers, and travelers navigating the region. By the time settlers arrived, the Aboriginal population in the area had diminished compared to earlier periods, such as during the establishment of Dowling Forest. While still present, these communities were often labelled as troublesome by settlers, largely due to incidents of theft. Some members of the tribes bore visible scars of smallpox, a haunting reminder of their earlier exposure to European diseases. The local Aboriginal tribes around Ballarat were often considered less industrious and more treacherous by early settlers when compared to the Murray tribes. Their interactions with settlers varied, causing challenges for both fair-minded and exploitative colonists alike. A prominent figure among the local tribes was King Billy, the chief of the groups around Mount Buninyong and Mount Emu. He was recognized with a brass plate declaring his title. These breastplates, also known as gorgets or king plates, were issued to Aboriginal elders and others, including stockmen, trackers, and individuals who had performed notable acts, such as faithful service or saving the lives of non-Indigenous people. Early Aboriginal breastplates were modelled after gorgets worn as badges by infantry officers in Australia until 1832. By the early days of the gold rush, the local Aboriginal population was already in decline. In 1852, Gold Diggers Monthly observed, "The poor Aborigines are sadly neglected and degraded. By begging, or by cutting the bark, they obtain money at the mines, and the wretches are always found ready to take their cash and give them firewater." The term firewater, an old word for alcohol, is believed to have originated from Native American languages. The early interactions between settlers and the Aboriginal people marked a complex and often turbulent chapter in the region's history, blending cultural encounters with profound challenges for both communities. A tragic event from this period gave rise to the name Murdering Valley, an area near the southwestern boundary of Sebastopol. This site was so named after the Learmonth's hut keeper was killed in an incident involving local Aboriginal people. Before the discovery of gold, Ballarat enjoyed over a decade of pastoral prosperity, built on wool growing and cattle breeding. This era, driven by the courage and enterprise of squatters, established the land as a cornerstone of the colony's wealth and future development. Yet, change was looming. In the quiet forests and valleys of the Pyrenees and the surrounding ranges, whispers of hidden riches began to surface. Shepherds and squatters occasionally spotted signs of untold wealth buried within the land. These discoveries were kept secret, shared only in hushed tones, as the glimmer of gold hinted at opportunities that could reshape the region and bring inevitable upheaval. Squatters, the unchallenged lords of the land, roamed across tens of thousands of acres with an insatiable appetite for territory. Yet their reign was on the verge of disruption. The rise of democratic ideals and a swelling population signaled that dramatic change was inevitable. The discovery of gold has the power to transform societies in ways that surpass even the legendary tales of Aladdin's lamp. Nowhere has this transformation been more extraordinary than in Ballarat, where gold reshaped the past, defined the present, and set the course for the future of the region. The discoveries in California in 1848 and in Australia in 1851 ignited a global gold rush, forever altering the histories of both continents. Thomas Hiscock, a blacksmith from Berkshire, England, spent time prospecting around the Buninyong area before finally uncovering a gold-bearing quartz in a gully on the 8th of August, 1851. His discovery attracted miners heading to Clunes and Warrandyte, some of whom diverted to Buninyong and set up camp in the area, which soon became known as Hiscock's Gully. Just days later, on the 16th of August, 1851, Lieutenant Governor Charles La Trobe issued two proclamations that changed the course of gold mining in Victoria. The first reserved all land rights on the goldfields to the Crown, and the second introduced a mining license fee of 30 shillings per month. This fee was designed to raise revenue, control the growing influx of people onto the goldfields, and reinforce the Crown's authority over the newly discovered wealth. When Commissioner Armstrong arrived at Buninyong with his black troopers to enforce the mining license fee, most diggers had already abandoned the area. They viewed the gold deposits as insufficiently rich to justify paying the hefty 30-shilling license fee. On the 21st of August, 1851, the elderly John Dunlop and his young companion, James Regan, struck gold on a small hill along the White Horse Range, a site that would later be known as Poverty Point. The extraordinary richness of their find ignited Ballarat's first major gold rush. Soon after, Golden Point, located to the northwest, was also discovered, further fueling the frenzy. The arrival of Commissioner Doveton and Assistant Commissioner Armstrong at Golden Point on the 19th of September, 1851 marked a turning point. The very next day, the first gold licenses were issued, formalizing the burgeoning rush. The gold rush transformed Ballarat almost overnight. The once quiet Sheep Run, with its rolling green slopes and the clear waters of Yarrawee Creek, became a chaotic hub of activity. Within a week, over 100 miners had converged on the shallow and highly productive diggings, sparking a colony-wide gold fever. Black Hill, once dense with timber, now overlooked a valley teeming with tents, churned up earth, and rough tracks carved by bullock teams. On the 25th of October, 1851, the Melbourne Daily News painted a vivid picture of the scene at Golden Point. The place resembled a citadel thrown to the ground. Thousands of men were running about like rabbits between burrows. Everything had the appearance of deep yellow earth, yellow clothes, yellow hands, yellow faces. Yellow everything. Not a spadeful of this earth, but possesses some amount of gold. On December 11, 1851, surveyor William Swan Urquhart set up camp at Yuille's Swamp, tasked with a monumental challenge, planning the layout of what would become the first township of the gold rush era. Urquhart later admitted to feeling the immense weight of responsibility, knowing his work would set the foundation for the new gold era. By January 17, 1852, Urquhart had completed his initial plans. Although the design lacked gardens, churches, markets, or public buildings, it featured two standout elements: its generous scale and remarkably wide streets. The main street was an impressive 3 chains wide, while other streets were 2 chains, allowing ample room for future growth and development. Urquhart named the streets after prominent government officials of the time, including Doveton, Lydiard, Dana, Armstrong, Mayor, and Sturt. When the first 40 land blocks were offered for sale in Geelong on August 25, 1852, the response was surprisingly lukewarm. Only 15 blocks were sold. Despite this modest beginning, Urquhart's vision laid the groundwork for what would become a vibrant and thriving township, forever tied to the enduring legacy of the gold rush. The tales of gold were not all glitter and glory. The promise of striking it rich drew people from every corner of the world to the Ballarat goldfields, but the journey itself was an ordeal. The Australian bush, with its rugged beauty, was also a place of lurking dangers. Travellers navigated treacherous paths, haunted by the constant fear of ambush by highwaymen. As daylight faded and shadows deepened, anxiety often gave way to raw terror. Gruesome stories, such as the chilling account of men brutally murdered on a desolate track, played over in their minds. Yet for many, these fears and hardships were small sacrifices for the chance to chase an elusive dream, unimaginable wealth, and a life of comfort. The diggers' axes stripped the forests bare, and the once pristine Yarrawee Creek ran yellow with runoff as its banks overflowed with tailings and cradles. Vibrant green hills were transformed, dotted with mounds of red, yellow, and white dirt, resembling a burial ground of upheaval. The orderly beauty of the landscape gave way to the industrious chaos of the gold rush. In their feverish pursuit of gold, diggers left an indelible mark on Ballarat's natural environment and social fabric, forever altering the region's character. From dawn to dusk, the diggers toiled relentlessly, their days consumed by back-breaking labor under the harsh, unyielding sun. Over time, a few managed to bring a semblance of home to the unforgiving goldfields. Makeshift awnings provided some relief from the heat, and, for those fortunate enough to have a woman to care for them, small gardens occasionally added a touch of color to the rugged landscape. Yet for the vast majority, life on the diggings was anything but comfortable. As the gold rush swelled and hopeful miners flooded the fields, the initial chaos began to give way to a semblance of order. The rough camps gradually evolved into fledgling communities, where routines and structure emerged amidst the frenzied scramble for fortune. A.C. MacDonald, a digger at Golden Point, captured the challenges of those early days in his diary. By October 1851, the population had grown to around 1,200, and snow fell unexpectedly, marking an unusual summer. Sly grog selling flourished despite repeated attempts to curb it, and poor postal services forced miners to walk all the way to Buninyong to collect their letters. Accidents were frequent due to careless mining practices, as tree roots often harbored gold but posed deadly risks when trees were undermined. By October 1851, approximately 10,000 men were working feverishly at Golden Point. However, the hillside deposit could not sustain the extraordinary rate of extraction, and by the end of the year, Ballarat was nearly deserted as miners flocked to the more promising diggings at Bendigo and Mount Alexander. Women were a rare sight on the goldfields, and their presence often stirred profound emotional responses among the diggers, reminding them of the families and loved ones they had left behind. The mere sight of a woman could evoke waves of nostalgia, prompting spontaneous gatherings and heartfelt reactions. In September 1851, there were only 10 women among 600 men on the goldfields. One of the first women to settle in Ballarat was Mrs. Thomas Bath, who established herself as a butcher. With women in short supply, grog became the primary solace for the men. Ironically, grog was often safer to drink than the contaminated water available at the goldfields. Among the adventurers drawn to the goldfields was David Ham, a pioneering figure across multiple sites. Ham's journey began in 1851 at Buninyong, where he observed Hiscock's early gold washing methods. Soon after, he moved to Ballarat, arriving just as the first licenses were being issued. Striking gold at Golden Point, Ham's entrepreneurial spirit propelled him to open claims at Canadian Gully and Eureka, where he experienced both great success and devastating setbacks. Ballarat's second gold rush was ignited by the discovery of the Canadian lead, a significant find that transformed the region once again. The Canadian lead was the first of Ballarat's famous deep leads, buried ancient riverbeds rich in alluvial and alluvial gold. Running east-west beneath Canadian Gully, just inside the southern boundary of what is now the Sovereign Hill Outdoor Museum, it drew miners back to Ballarat in droves. The gully itself was named after a Canadian digger, Swift, who prospected there alongside fellow Canadians and Americans. The discovery of the first monster nugget at Canadian Gully in February 1853 marked a pivotal moment in Ballarat's history. Subsequent finds, such as the Welcome Nugget in 1858 and the Welcome Stranger in 1869, further solidified Ballarat's reputation as a source of extraordinary gold wealth. However, beneath the surface of this prosperity, tensions were building over the controversial gold license fees. Many miners initially lacked licenses and were detained at the camp under the watchful eyes of Aboriginal troopers. The friction between diggers and authorities became an enduring struggle, as relentless harassment by troopers enforcing license regulations weighed heavily on the miners. Stories of hardship spread across the goldfields, reflecting the resilience and determination of the diggers. One such tale is that of Thomas Mayer, a digger who hid in a hollow log to evade troopers, only to find himself sharing the cramped space with a snake. These vivid accounts capture the unique blend of camaraderie, struggle, and defiance that defined life on the Victorian goldfields, laying the groundwork for the historic confrontation at the Eureka Stockade. The Ballarat Township, which would later become the city of Ballarat, was officially proclaimed in mid-1852. By 1855, it was a municipality, and by 1863, a borough. The first land sales took place in Geelong, where Thomas Bath purchased the very first lot for business purposes in November 1852. In May 1853, Bath constructed Ballarat's first hotel, the Bath's Hotel, which was later licensed in June that year. Originally a single-story wooden building, the hotel stood on the current site of Craig's Royal Hotel. The introduction of the mining license fee sparked widespread peaceful protests among the diggers. The earliest rally took place on the 26th of August, 1851 at Hiscock's Gully in Buninyong, attracting 40 to 50 miners who opposed the new mining regulations. During the meeting, 4 resolutions were passed in defiance of the fees. This gathering marked the beginning of ongoing protests across the colony's mining settlements, culminating in the 1854 armed uprising at Ballarat. The rebellion's leadership eventually fell to Peter Lawler, an Irish-Australian gold miner and passionate advocate for justice. The miners protested against the exorbitant mining fees, taxation without representation, and the notorious digger hunts conducted by corrupt and poorly trained police officers. We have already created an in-depth video on the Eureka Rebellion, so we won't delve too deeply into it here. For those interested, we encourage you to check out our video on the Eureka Rebellion for a detailed account of this pivotal event. John Lynch, one of Peter Laller's captains, vividly described the charged atmosphere leading up to the Eureka Stockade. It was at this critical juncture, when men's minds were seething with passion, that another hunting raid was got up and carried out with so many incidents of undisguised truculence, as to leave no doubt of its having been intended to provoke hostilities. It was meant for a challenge and as such was accepted. For the diggers, the Eureka Stockade was a battle lost but a war ultimately won. Its legacy stretched far beyond the goldfields, profoundly influencing mining laws, advancing equality in society, and reforming legislative administration. The bold stand at Eureka became a cornerstone of Australia's identity, inspiring future generations to fight for fairness and justice. It left an indelible mark on the nation's democratic evolution. As tensions escalated over increased digger hunts by authorities, protesters gathered again on the 3rd of December, this time returning to Bakery Hill before marching to Eureka Lead, where a stockade had been hastily constructed. Initially, the Eureka stockade was intended to provide cover for diggers to drill, rather than to serve as a fortress. Spanning roughly an acre, it was enclosed with crude wooden slabs and situated near a bend of Eureka Lead, along what is now Eureka Street. The stockade housed shallow mining pits, diggers' tents, and quarters for the insurgent leaders and their men, serving as the heart of their resistance. Before dawn on December 3, 1854, a force of 276 government troops, comprising cavalry and infantry, silently assembled at the Ballarat camp, their sights set on the Eureka stockade. Under the cover of early morning darkness, they advanced with precision, preparing to strike. As the first light broke over the horizon, a sentinel within the stockade spotted the approaching troops and fired a warning shot. That single shot became the spark that ignited the battle. Captain John Thomas of the 40th Regiment wasted no time, ordering his men to charge. In less than half an hour, the stockade lay in ruins, and the rebel diggers were defeated. Yet, the consequences of this confrontation would resonate far beyond the battlefield, marking a turning point in Australia's journey toward justice and equality. The battle resulted in the deaths of at least 22 miners and 5 soldiers, though the exact toll remains a subject of debate. Even before the dramatic events of the Eureka stockade, Ballarat was a place where ambition, desperation, and opportunity collided. While many toiled tirelessly on the goldfields, others sought quicker, more audacious ways to secure wealth. One such daring act occurred in October 1854, when Ballarat witnessed its first bank robbery, a crime that highlighted the bold, and sometimes reckless, spirit of the gold rush era. Ballarat's first well-documented bank robbery unfolded on October 16, 1854, in a bold and audacious heist. 4 digger mates, Henry Garrett, a stonemason from Geelong, and fellow diggers Henry Marriott, Thomas Quinn, and John Bolton, walked into the Bank of Victoria on Bakery Hill. Armed with nothing more than an unloaded pistol, they brazenly held up the clerk at the counter, escaping with 350 ounces of gold and approximately £14,300 in cash. The plan, conceived just the day before in their tent at the gravel pits, was executed flawlessly. After dividing the spoils, the gang quickly scattered. Garrett wasted no time and boarded a ship bound for England, while Quinn and Bolton headed to Melbourne, where they sold their share of the gold to the London Chartered Bank. Marriott chose to remain in Ballarat, keeping a low profile in local lodgings. However, greed and recklessness soon unravelled their scheme. Quinn and Bolton foolishly returned to Ballarat, and in a particularly brazen move, Bolton revisited the very Bank of Victoria. Attempting to draw a draft on London for £1,450 using the stolen money, he was recognised by bank staff and promptly arrested. The police acted swiftly, apprehending Marriott and Quinn soon after. Meanwhile, Victorian police tracked Garrett all the way to London. The story goes that Detective Henry Webb cornered him on a London street, catching him off guard with the distinctly Australian bush cry, "Coo-ee." Startled and unable to escape, Garrett was apprehended, brought back to Australia, and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Though bold and meticulously planned, the robbery ultimately unravelled due to the robbers' overconfidence. It remains a tale of audacity, pursuit, and justice etched into Ballarat's history, a reminder of a country where even bushranger Ned Kelly is celebrated as a folk hero. Ballarat's story doesn't end here. Beneath its golden legacy lies a complex web of bold characters, simmering tensions, and events that shook not just the goldfields, but an entire empire. From the fiery spirit of the Irish in Ballarat, to an act so daring it targeted Queen Victoria's own son, there's much more to uncover. Stay tuned for part 2, where the intrigue deepens, and Ballarat's history takes even more unexpected turns.